Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, where we bring awareness of sustainable health in the business hustle space. The Natural Health Podcast is perfect for the high-performing, business-minded individual who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve optimal health. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for What Would I Do? In today's episode of the Natural Health Podcast, we discuss this week's question. All questions are kept confidential. I read them and answer them as if it was me, hence why it's called What Would I Do? The information provided is not to be taken as advice and is solely for information purposes only. I'm not here to cure, treat, or provide medical advice. I'm here to educate and inform you so you are able to make a well decision and take steps towards optimal health. Please discuss any medical issues or healthcare changes or lifestyle changes with your healthcare professional. Let's get into today's question. The question is, my son has been diagnosed with ADHD and is currently taking Saffron, Bacopa, and melatonin. What are your thoughts on ADHD and the supplementation that he's taking? Absolutely great question. Before I start, I want to let you know I'm not a specialist in children's health. And I usually work with adults. However, I am well aware of ADHD and I understand it. And I can go into it, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I understand the supplements like Saffron, Bacopa, melatonin. So I've done my research on it, and let's get into it. And let's have a first look at what is ADHD, right? So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD, affects about 5 to 9% of children, and it is characterized by developmental inappropriate levels of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention that affects behavioral, emotional, cognitive, academic, and social functions. That is a lot. That's a lot happening in children with ADHD, even with adults in ADHD. It's not just children that have ADHD. So why do people get it? So genetic, neural, and environmental factors interact to create a neurobiological susceptibility for the disorder that features reduced dopamine activity and low serotonin activity, resulting in synaptic understimulation triggering hyperactivity. So essentially what that's saying is there's an issue there with some neurotransmitters, right? The characteristics have been associated with a decrease in brain blood flow, affecting neurometabolism and firing, impaired neural connectivity, increased oxidative stress, and neuroinflammation. Essentially, that's a few things I'm going to go into a little bit more about. That's a few things happening in the brain of a kid or a human with ADHD. So some of the signs of ADHD, which you probably would know as being a parent of a child with ADHD, include lack of attention to detail, difficulty sustaining attention, difficulty with listening skills, difficulty with task completion, difficulty with organizational skills, with tasks required sustained attention, frequent forgetful loss of belongings, easily distracted by stimuli, fidgety, difficulty waiting for their turn, standing when sitting is expected, running around inappropriately, difficult with quiet play, inability to relax and remain still, excessive talking or frequently interrupting, impulsively expressed as acting without thinking, and so forth. These are just some of them, right? Your kid doesn't have to have all of them to be identified with ADHD. So essentially what happens is I'm actually going to do a big podcast on ADHD in particular, also in adults. So please keep an eye out on it, but I'm going to answer your question today. So what essentially happens is there's a dysregulation and delayed development maybe of the prefrontal and brain regions, resulting in impaired impulses control and reduced ability to inhibit responses, right? What can also happen is there's a difference in neurological circuit with frontal lobe and the citiatal connection, resulting in preference for immediate reward seeking, reduced receptiveness to punishment, and increased need for repetitive positive reinforcement. There can be a gene mutation in thyroid receptor gene beta, resulting in reduced responsiveness to thyroid hormones. There can be a reduced dopamine receptor sensitivity and transport. There can be an aberrant neuroadrenic function, increasing impulsivity and cognitive responses. There could be a HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction with greater cortisol reactivity. There could be a reduced brain-derived neuropathic factor, BDNF, a key promoter of neurogenesis, mutation, and survival, as well as regulation of scientific functions likely to structural alterations of ADHD. and so many more. Essentially, that was just all a bit of fancy talk right there about what's happening in the brain. But essentially, your question is in regards to those specific 3 herbs. So, herbs and supplementations. So let's get into what I would do if I had a child and my child was diagnosed with ADHD. The number one thing is the questions that I would ask, right? These are the questions that I would ask is, what makes it better? What makes it worse, right? The key is to keep a record and measure. Without this, we don't know what is actually happening within our child, because sometimes when bad things happen, we concentrate more on that than when good things happen, right? Sometimes. And I mean, it could be so frustrating for the adults that are looking after the child too, the caretakers, the parents, and so forth, right? But the key is to understand what makes it better. It's kind of like keeping a diary on your child. It's like, today we did this, and he's like keeping a score of hyperactivity out of 10, focus out of 10, listening skills out of 10. Have some measurements there that you're able to compare to, right? That's what I would do. I would have some measurements there. It's kind of like maybe do this for about 2-3 months, and then you have some data there that you can look at and actually take things out of it, take results out of it, right? The other thing is I would ask questions of environmental toxicity, right? Has the child been exposed to environmental toxicity? If that is whilst in the belly, in your belly, or whilst now, like, is there any environmental toxicity the kid's being exposed to? If it's in childcare, if it's at its mum's, at school, at home, the environment, it's very important to look at the environment. Are there any environmental toxins that he or she's been exposed to? When did the ADHD start? What changed around that time? What may have triggered it? Do the parents have this also? Do the parents have ADHD or any one of those? Because it may be genetic, but like I always say, genetic does not mean you're going to get it. It's only 25% of it. But if you know that it may be genetic, then there are extra things that need to be put into place, right? What is the diet of the child? Does the child have an intake of artificial colors, flavorings, preservatives, and so forth, right? Does the child have blood sugar regulation issues? What I mean by that is the sugar goes up, the sugar goes down. When the sugar goes up and down, of course, you're not going to be able to concentrate. I myself, if I have sugar, my gosh, that uphill, I get so hyperactive, and that downhill, I can't listen. So you may think I have ADHD for that hour or two of my blood sugar level being out of balance. So it's important to understand, is the blood sugar out of balance? Does the child have chronic inflammation? Is there an accumulation of environmental toxins? Is the child being exposed to smoke, either secondhand smokes around? Is it being exposed to car fumes? Is it being exposed to factories? Anything along those lines, what it may be exposed to throughout its everyday, right? Does the child have an MTHFR gene SNP? This is very important. Does the child have circadian rhythm disruption? So it's awake during the night and asleep during the day. Is that out of balance? Any sleep issues? Because sleep issues can directly influence ADHD. Does the child have HPA dysfunction? Like I mentioned, the adrenal issues. Does the child have gastrointestinal dysfunction? Does the child have nutritional deficiencies such as B6, B2, omega, and iron, the key ones, right? These are just some of the questions. I'm running out of time. I could ask so many more questions. What would I do? Let's get into it. I would get the child tested for iron, B9, B12, vitamin D, zinc, and copper ratios. This is absolutely key for ADHD. I would also do a few more tests, which include an omega-3 test, a zinc test, a pyrrole test, celiac serology, heavy metal hair analysis, and the the MTHFR genetic polymorphism, see if they do have that. I would also test the health of the microbiota of the child. If there was any secondhand smoke, I would make sure that that is not exposed to any other environmental toxins, make sure that it's not exposed to. But first and foremost, I would have the removal of additives from diet. This is absolutely key. This is the key to make sure I review the diet of the child and then have a look at and remove these sugars, these additives, these flavorings, these fast foods. Diet is the number one thing to have a look at, because sugar cravings and high sugar intakes are associated with hyperactivity, depression, moodiness, and ADHD, right? Remove those soft drinks, those processed grain products, those cookies, that pasta, the chips, that junk food, those lollies. I know they love it. They love it because it gives them energy and, but at the end of the day, is it beneficial for them? No, right? If the child is a fussy eater with food, I would make sure I rule out digestive issues and any food intolerances with tests maybe. I'll choose healthy, unprocessed forms of foods. I would also give the child a choice of food, of healthy foods, introduce new foods by hiding or disguising in their favorite food. I would be patient. Water. The kid needs to be hydrated. It needs to be hydrated to make sure everything's happening well. Avoid snacking with regular, predictable meal times. This is key for children with ADHD. They need routine. Their food needs to be at 10, 12, 2, 8. It needs to be every single day the same time, and see if that makes a difference, because that is absolutely key. Give lots of praise, and I would give lots of praise and reward when they're trying new foods. That's good for them. I would ensure that they have enough protein in there. I would ensure they have enough magnesium with greens, nuts. And then there's an interesting thing is I'm rushing because I'm running out of time. I'm supposed to be doing 10 minutes here, but I would consider a gluten-free, casein-free diet in conjunction with eliminating artificial colors, flavorings, and preservatives. So these are the key things that have been linked with ADHD, right? I would promote, so the thing that I could include is chamomile tea at a low dose I would have, because it helps with GABA, it helps calm the individual and has anxiolytic little effects, right? Magnesium reduces cortisol, which means it makes melatonin, which your question was, to get more sleep. Zinc if needed, because ADHD children who were given 30 mgs of zinc over 10 weeks showed improved attention and reduced hyperactivity, increasing their IQ scores and their cognitive ability. Huge. EPA and DHA, oh my gosh, this is like the thing for ADHD kids, right? I would give my kid a good kids multi, which includes Bs, vitamin Bs, all the Bs I spoke about, magnesium, zinc, C, D, iron, essential fatty acids like DHA and EPA. Also give the kids probiotics if necessary. This is where it's key to work with a healthcare professional to ensure the supplement that you're getting are key. It's a good form of B, it's a good form of zinc, it's a good form at a time, and so forth. Let's answer your question about Bacopa. Right, Bacopa is an absolutely excellent herb shown to be effective in improving focus and cognition. In addition to that, there was a 12-week double-blinded study where children with ADHD who took 50 milligrams twice a day showed significant improvements over children receiving a placebo of mental control, memory, and also learning, right? Saffron, absolutely amazing. In a 6 weeks randomized double-blind study, what they did is they took kids with ADHD. They were randomly assigned to either receive 20 to 30 grams of MPH, which is methylphenidate, which is used for ADHD kids, or 20 to 30 milligrams of saffron. Sorry, that was also milligrams of saffron capsule, depending on their weight. So the short-term therapy with saffron capsules showed the same effect compared to methylphenidate. Right, crazy, right? And melatonin, I have done a podcast episode on what would I do with melatonin already. Check that out. So essential, your question, I've spoken about ADHD, is what can go wrong in individuals, or what occurs in individuals' brains with ADHD, and then what I would do, some questions that I would do, and what I would do. Number one thing is, before I would take anything, the way I go is, before putting anything in the body, I always remove things from the body. So removing foods, removing toxins, removing things that are not serving the child with the ADHD, and then I would add things. I would not add things already, because this kid has already got so many things happening. The first key thing is removal of things that are aggravating the body. Okay, that is the number one. I hope I shed some light to ADHD in children, and specific with melatonin, saffron, and Bacopa. So I hope I shed some light to you and anyone that has these questions that are similar to this. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at mihaela.raguz on Instagram, and I'll be in touch with you and hopefully share your question on the Natural Health Podcast. Remember, you're not alone in a journey of optimal health. I'm here to assist you and make your journey a pleasant one. Until next Wednesday, love you.